They smiled at me across the mahogany table, as if we had just argued over dinner rather than a lifetime of exclusion. When the lawyer read the figure $3.8 billion, my mother placed her hand on mine, her voice trembling as she finally called me her beloved daughter. They had no idea grandfather left me more than just money. He left a trap designed to lock them away forever. My name is Nina Austin. Most people in this city know the Austin name from the society pages of the Tribune or the bronze plaques on the hospital wings downtown. But nobody connects those Austins to the woman wearing steel-toed boots and a high-visibility vest on the loading dock of Northline Freight Systems. I prefer it that way. It is 6 in the morning in the Midwest, and the air is biting cold, carrying the sharp scent of diesel fuel and wet concrete. This is my domain. As the operations manager, I oversee the movement of 40 tons of cargo daily. It is a world of hard edges, strict schedules, and zero tolerance for excuses. If a truck is late, we lose money. If a driver is tired, people get hurt. There is no room here for the kind of polite fictions my family thrives on. I watched a forklift driver maneuver a pallet of industrial piping with delicate precision. Nodding to him as he passed, he nodded back. That was the currency I dealt in now. Respect earned through competence, not bloodline. It was a stark contrast to the world I was born into. A world where affection was a performance art and loyalty was bought with trust funds. My parents, Richard and Elena Austin, are masters of that performance. To the public, they are the golden couple of philanthropy, the benevolent guardians of the city's cultural heritage. They host galas that cost more than my annual salary, wearing smiles that are as practiced and rigid as the starch in my father's collars. And then there is Lucas, my brother, the golden boy. Lucas is 2 years older than me and has never worked a real day in his life. He calls himself an entrepreneur. I call him a sinkhole for capital. Last year, he decided he was going to revolutionize the bottled water industry with some alkaline concept he read about in a blog. My father poured $2 million into the venture. It lasted 6 months before the FDA shut it down for labeling violations. At the family dinner following the collapse, my mother stroked Lucas's hair and told him that true visionaries are always persecuted by bureaucracy. They refinanced a vacation home to cover his legal fees. When I pointed out that his business plan had no distribution model, my father looked at me with cold, disappointed eyes and told me I lacked empathy. That has always been my label. The difficult one, the cold one, the one who does not fit. Growing up, I learned quickly that in the Austin household, truth was an unwelcome guest. If I said the dress looked tight, I was being cruel. If I pointed out that Dad was drinking too much scotch before noon, I was being disrespectful. I was the observer, the quiet child in the corner who watched the cracks in the plaster widen while everyone else admired the wallpaper. I did not know how to flatter, and I refused to pretend that our dysfunction was normal. The breaking point happened when I was 18 years old. It is a memory that plays in my mind with high-definition clarity, usually when I am driving home alone on the interstate. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after my high school graduation. I had been accepted to the state university, a sensible choice that I was proud of. Lucas had just flunked out of his second private college, an event my parents were spinning as a sabbatical for mental health. I was summoned to the library, a room smelling of old leather and unread books. My parents were sitting together on the Chesterfield sofa, presenting a united front of solemnity. "Nina, we have been discussing your future," my father said, swirling the ice in his glass. I sat in the stiff wingback chair opposite them, my hands folded in my lap. I waited. "We feel that you have become too comfortable," my mother added, her voice soft, the way one speaks to a frightened animal or a slow child. "You lack the drive that Lucas has. You take our generosity for granted." I blinked, confused. I had a summer job. I maintained a 4.0 grade point average. I never asked for extra allowance. Lucas had totaled 3 cars in 4 years. "To help you build character, we are cutting you off," my father said. He said it casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "Effective immediately. You need to learn independence. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." "But what about tuition?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What about the dorm deposit? You will figure it out, he said, taking a sip of his drink. Sink or swim. Nina, it is the only way you will learn gratitude. I looked at Lucas, who was leaning against the door frame, smirking. He was twirling the keys to a brand new Range Rover, a graduation gift for completing his rehab stint. The hypocrisy was so thick it felt like I was choking on it. But I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply stood up. I understand, I said. I went to my room and packed one suitcase. I took my clothes, my laptop, and a photo of my grandmother who had passed away when I was 5. I left the jewelry they had given me. I left the designer bags. I walked out of that mansion without looking back. I heard my mother sobbing theatrically as I closed the front door, crying about how hard it was to be a parent, waiting for me to run back and apologize. I never did. That night, I slept in a cheap motel near the bus station. The lock on the door was broken, and I pushed a chair against the handle. I was terrified, but beneath the fear, there was a strange, cold clarity. I realized then that their love was a transaction, and I had just defaulted on the contract. The only person who reached out was Walter Austin, my grandfather. Walter was a terrifying figure to most people. He built the Austin empire from a single hardware store into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. He was ruthless in the boardroom and distant in person. He didn't come to birthday parties. He didn't send cards. But 3 days after I left, a black sedan pulled up to the diner where I had found a job washing dishes. The driver told me Mr. Austin wanted to see me. I was taken to his estate, a sprawling property on the lake that felt more like a fortress than a home. Walter was sitting on the terrace, staring out at the gray water. He didn't look at me when I sat down. "I hear you got evicted," he said. His voice was like grinding gravel. I left. I corrected him. He turned to look at me then. His eyes were the same shade of steel gray as mine. He studied my face, looking for weakness, looking for the same fragility he saw in his son. My father. "Your father is a fool," Walter said. "He thinks money is a substitute for parenting, and your brother is soft. He has never had to hunt for his dinner." I stayed silent. I knew better than to interrupt Walter when he was making an assessment. "I am not going to give you money, Nina," he said. "I didn't ask for any," I replied. He cracked a smile. It was a rare, jagged thing. "Good, because if you had, I would have sent you away. But you need a roof, and you need a path. There is a vacancy in the mailroom at one of my logistics subsidiaries. Minimum wage, long hours. You can stay in the gatehouse at the edge of my property, but you will pay me rent every month. Market rate. If you are late, you are out." It was a cold offer. Stripped of any familial warmth, it was exactly what I needed. I took the deal. For the next 12 years, I worked, I started sorting mail, then moved to dispatch, then to fleet management. I took night classes to get my degree in supply chain management. I paid Walter his rent on the 1st of every month, slipping the envelope under his door. We rarely spoke, but sometimes, when I was working late in the gatehouse, studying for an exam, I would see the light on in his study up at the main house. It felt like a silent vigil. We were the only two Austins who understood the value of work. I learned later that my parents had tried to intervene. They wanted me to come home, mostly because my poverty looked bad for their image. Walter had shut them down. He told them I was doing the one thing they had never done, becoming an adult. Now, at 30 years old, I have scars on my hands and a bank account that I filled myself, dollar by dollar. I drive a 5-year-old sedan that I maintain myself. I live in a condo that is clean, quiet, and entirely mine. When I walk into a room, I do not need to announce who my father is. I know who I am. But the resentment never truly left. It just evolved. It turned into a hard, dense knot in my chest. I watched from a distance as Lucas failed and failed again, always falling upward, always cushioned by the family fortune that Walter had built and my father was squandering. I watched them preen in the social spotlight. taking credit for charities they barely understood, while I balanced shift schedules and negotiated fuel contracts. I thought I had escaped them. I thought I had built a wall high enough to keep their toxicity out. But then the call came. It was yesterday morning. I was on the dock, checking a manifest for a shipment to Chicago. My phone buzzed. It was Walter's personal attorney. "Nina," he said. His voice was grave. "It is your grandfather. You need to come to the hospital." I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Lucas. I just got in my car and drove. When I arrived, the room was already crowded with them. My mother was weeping into a silk handkerchief, checking her reflection in the darkened window. My father was pacing, talking loudly on his phone about restructuring assets. Lucas was playing a game on his tablet, looking bored. They looked up when I entered. There was a flicker of annoyance in my father's eyes, as if I were an uninvited guest at a private party. "He is unconscious," my mother sniffed. "He has been unresponsive for 2 hours." I ignored them. I walked to the bed. Walter looked small. The titan of industry, the man who terrified boards of directors and politicians alike, was reduced to a fragile figure beneath white sheets, but his hand, resting on the blanket, was still strong. I covered it with mine. It was rough, calloused from the years before he was rich, the years he never let himself forget. I squeezed his hand, and for a second, just a second, I felt a faint pressure in return. "I am here, grandfather," I whispered. I stayed until the end. I watched the monitor flatline. I watched my parents immediately shift into crisis management mode, discussing press releases and funeral arrangements before his body was even cold. I watched Lucas ask if this meant he could finally get the trust fund release he had been whining about. I walked out of the hospital into the cool night air, feeling a grief that was sharp and clean. I had lost the only person who respected me. But as I drove home, back to my quiet condo, back to the life I had built from the scraps they threw away, I had no idea that Walter had one last lesson to teach us all. I thought the hard part was over. I thought the years of rejection were the price I had already paid. I did not know that the reading of the will would not just be a legal formality, it would be a declaration of war. And for the first time in my life, I was holding the ammunition. The years following my departure from the family home were defined by a peculiar ritual, every second Sunday, like clockwork. I drove my beat-up sedan past the manicured hedges of the estate, parked around the back near the kitchen entrance, and walked into the solarium where Walter spent his afternoons. We did not hug. We did not exchange pleasantries about the weather or my dating life. We played chess. For the first 6 months, he beat me within 15 minutes. He never offered advice or pointed out my mistakes. He simply took my king, reset the board, and waited for me to make the first move again. It was infuriating, but it was also the most honest interaction I had ever experienced. In the silence of that room, surrounded by the ticking of antique clocks and the view of the gray lake, I learned that my grandfather communicated through pressure, not words. One rainy afternoon, after he had trapped my queen for the 3rd time, he finally spoke. He did not look at the board. He looked out at the rain slashing against the glass. "Nina," he said, his voice low and raspy, "in this family, and in this world, you must be wary of the wolves, but do not look for the ones baring their teeth. They are easy to spot. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who smiles and tells you they know what is best for you." I paused, my hand hovering over a knight. I knew exactly who he was talking about. My mother's favorite phrase was that she only wanted what was best for me, usually right before she critiqued my appearance or undermined my confidence. He turned his gaze to me. "Control disguised as care is the hardest chain to break. Never forget that." That was the beginning of my real education. It was not the kind of education Lucas was getting at his Ivy League mixers. It was a curriculum of survival. The curriculum intensified after a specific incident during my 25th year. I had come to the house on an off day, a Tuesday, to drop off some logistics reports Walter had requested regarding a supply chain bottleneck in the southern region. As I approached the library, the heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. I heard my father's voice. It was pitched in that wheedling, desperate tone he used when he was asking for capital. Dad was pitching a new expansion for the family's charitable foundation, a project that I knew was essentially a vanity vehicle for him to secure a seat on a prestigious arts board. He was asking for $5 million. Walter must have asked about me, though I could not hear his question. I only heard my father's response, clear and cutting. "Dad, be realistic," my father said. "Nina is a worker bee. She is fine for the warehouse, I suppose, but she is not a leader. Honestly, she is not worth a long-term investment. She lacks the pedigree. She lacks the shine." I froze in the hallway, clutching the file folder against my chest. It was not that I expected him to defend me. It was the clinical nature of his dismissal. I was not a daughter to him. I was an asset class, and a performing one at that, but one with a low ceiling. I waited for Walter to defend me. I waited for him to shout, to tell his son that I was the only one actually working for the company, but there was only silence. I walked away. I left the reports on the hall table and drove back to my apartment. My hands shaking on the steering wheel, I felt a cold knot of betrayal. Even Walter, I thought, had agreed with him by his silence. I was wrong. The next Sunday, Walter did not set up the chessboard. Instead, he was waiting for me with his coat on. "Drive," he said. We drove into the city, to a nondescript brownstone building in the older legal district. There was no brass plaque outside, no valet parking. We took a creaky elevator to the 4th floor and entered an office that smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. Behind a desk buried under mountains of paper sat a man who looked older than the building itself. This was Arthur. He was not a corporate shark in a glass tower. He was a technician of the law. "Sit down," Walter commanded. For the next 4 hours, Arthur walked me through the anatomy of a trust. He did not explain it in the simple terms of beneficiary and trustee. He explained the weaponry of it. He showed me how a well-structured document could strangle a beneficiary without them ever realizing it. He showed me how discretionary powers were essentially a license for control. Walter watched me from the corner, his eyes sharp. "You are not here to learn how to get rich. Nina," Walter said when I looked confused by the density of the legal jargon, "you are here to learn how the rich destroy each other. Your father understands money as something to spend. Your mother understands it as something to show. I want you to understand it as a lever." We went back to Arthur's office once a month for 3 years. I learned about revocable versus irrevocable trusts. I learned about the fiduciary duties that could be weaponized to sue a trustee into oblivion. I learned how to hide assets in plain sight and how to expose them when they were hidden. It was during these sessions that Walter introduced me to Redcliffe Advisory. It sounded like a hedge fund, but it was not. It was a shadow cabinet. Walter had assembled a small team of forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, and private investigators who answered only to him. They were not on the company payroll. They were paid through a blind trust in Delaware. "Redcliffe is your insurance," Walter told me one afternoon as we sat on a park bench, watching pigeons fight over a crust of bread. He handed me a thin binder. Inside were dossiers, not on competitors, but on my family. There were bank statements from my father's offshore accounts. There were emails between Lucas and sketchy venture capitalists. There were records of my mother's charity expenses that looked suspiciously like personal shopping sprees. I felt a wave of nausea. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because knowledge is not power." "Nina," he said, tapping the binder with his cane, "action is power. Knowledge is just potential. You are going to keep this potential stored away. You are not going to say a word." "But why?" I asked. "If you know they are stealing from you, if you know they are incompetent, why do you let them continue?" Walter looked at me, and his expression was terrifyingly devoid of emotion. "Because if I stop them now, they will just find another way. They will play the victim. They will claim I was a tyrant. No. The only way to win this game is to let them hang themselves. You have to give them enough rope." He leaned in closer. "Do not strike early. Nina, that is the mistake of the amateur. They strike out of anger. You must strike out of necessity, and only when the trap is fully set. Let them reveal themselves. Let them think they are winning. Arrogance is the best anesthetic. They will not feel the knife until it is already in the bone. As the years passed, I watched Walter grow frailer. The walk from the car to the lake house took longer. An oxygen tank became a permanent fixture next to his chess table. His skin became translucent, like parchment paper, but his mind never wavered. If anything, it crystallized. He began to transfer knowledge to me with an urgency that frightened me. He stopped speaking in metaphors and started giving me codes, access keys, and contact numbers. He made me memorize the phone number for the head of Redcliffe, a man I was only to call in a catastrophic event. 6 months before he died, on a day when his breathing was particularly labored, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, a sudden spasm of energy. "They think I am senile," he rasped. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your father brought a doctor here last week, a specialist in geriatric cognition. He wanted to see if he could declare me incompetent, to take control of the estate before I die." My blood ran cold. I started to stand up, furious. "I will kill him," I said. "Sit down," Walter snapped. I sat. The doctor was an honest man. Walter said, "He told your father I was as sharp as a tack. Your father was disappointed." Walter let out a dry, rattling laugh. He does not know that I recorded the conversation. Redcliffe has it. He looked at me, his gray eyes piercing through the fog of his illness. "Listen to me, Nina. When I go, the sharks will frenzy. They will see you as a small fish. They will think you are weak because you are quiet. They will think you are vulnerable because you are alone." He squeezed my wrist until it hurt. "Use that. Let them underestimate you. It is the greatest gift I can give you, the element of surprise. When the will is read, do not react, do not gloat, do not cry. Be a stone. And when they come for you, and they will come for you, remember what we talked about. Remember the lever." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I promise." "Good," he whispered, releasing my hand. "Now, set up the board. You played a sloppy defense last week. We need to fix that." We played chess until the sun went down. He beat me, of course, but that day, for the first time, I managed to force him into a draw. He didn't say congratulations. He just looked at the board, then at me, and gave a single, satisfied nod. That nod was the last approval I ever got from him. It was all I needed. When the end came and the chaos began, I held on to that memory. I held on to the image of the old lawyer, the secret files, and the lesson of the silence. My family saw a grieving granddaughter in the corner. They did not see the architect of their downfall, sitting quietly, waiting for them to make their move. The reading of the will took place on a Tuesday morning, 5 days after we buried Walter. The location was the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the financial district, within the offices of Thorne, Sterling, and Halloway. The conference room was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the same city my family believed they owned, and the same city where I had spent the last decade working in its industrial underbelly. My parents, Richard and Elena, arrived 10 minutes late. They swept into the room in a cloud of expensive perfume and performative grief. My mother wore a black designer dress that probably cost more than my car, and she dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father wore a bespoke suit, his face set in a mask of solemn gravity that I knew was hiding his impatience. They barely looked at me. To them, I was just background noise, a requisite attendee who would likely receive a token amount of cash, or perhaps a sentimental piece of furniture. Lucas followed them in. He looked hungover. He slumped into the leather chair furthest from the head of the table, checking his phone. He offered me a tight, pitying smile. "Hey, Nina," he said, his voice dripping with casual condescension. "Did you manage to get the day off work? I know they are strict with the hourly employees at the warehouse. I am an operations manager." "Lucas," I said, keeping my voice even, "and yes, I am here." He chuckled and turned back to his screen. I bet the old man left you his library. You were the only one who liked those dusty old books. Maybe you can sell them." I did not respond. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the polished mahogany table. Inside, my heart was hammering against my ribs, but on the outside, I was the stone Walter had taught me to be. The room fell silent as Mr. Thorne entered. He was the senior partner, a man with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human greed. He carried a thick leather portfolio. He sat at the head of the table, adjusted his glasses, and looked at each of us in turn. When his gaze landed on me, there was a flicker of something indiscernible, perhaps respect, perhaps warning. He broke the seal on the document with a sharp crack that echoed in the quiet room. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Walter Jameson Austin." Mr. Thorne began. His voice was a dry baritone. "As per Mr. Austin's instructions, the reading is being recorded." My father leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Let us get on with it. Thorne, we all know the structure. We just need to sign the transfer papers for the holding company so I can stabilize the stock price. The market has been jittery since the news broke." Mr. Thorne ignored him. He began to read. The preamble was standard legal language, establishing Walter's sound mind and intent. Then came the inventory of the estate. I watched my parents as the numbers were read. Their expressions shifted from solemnity to poorly concealed avarice. "To the estate," Mr. Thorne read, "belongs the portfolio of global equities valued at $1.2 billion. My mother's breath hitched. She reached out and squeezed my father's hand. "To the estate belongs the real estate holdings, including the commercial properties in New York, London, and Tokyo, as well as the Austin family manor and the lake house, collectively valued at $850 million. Lucas looked up from his phone. He was doing the math. "To the estate belongs the controlling interest in Austin Industries and its subsidiaries, valued at $1.6 billion, along with the private equity reserves and the venture capital arm." Mr. Thorne paused. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the scent of money. "The total valuation of the estate," he said, looking over his glasses, "is estimated at $3.8 billion. My father exhaled a long, shaky breath. He was already spending it in his head. He was already planning the board meeting where he would announce his new era. "Excellent," my father said, standing up halfway. "It is even more than we projected. Walter really did hoard it all. Didn't he? Well, let us proceed. I assume the division is the standard 60-40 split between the direct descendants, with a trust allowance for the grandchildren?" Mr. Thorne held up a hand. "Please sit down. Mr. Austin, I have not read the distribution clause yet." My father sat, looking annoyed at the breach of protocol. Mr. Thorne turned the page. The sound of the paper turning was the loudest noise in the world. "I, Walter Jameson Austin, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils regarding the distribution of my entire estate, including all assets, properties, equities, and controlling interests previously mentioned." My mother leaned in, her eyes wide. "I leave everything to my granddaughter, Nina Austin." For a moment, nobody moved. The words hung in the air like smoke. It was as if the laws of physics had been suspended. I saw Lucas blink, his brain failing to process the sentence. I saw my father's jaw go slack. My mother froze, her handkerchief halfway to her face. Then the explosion happened. "What?" Lucas barked, a sharp, ugly laugh escaping his throat. "That is a joke. Read it again. You skipped a line." "I assure you, I did not skip a line." "Mr. Thorne said calmly, "Nina Austin is the sole beneficiary of the estate. There are no other beneficiaries named." My father's face turned a violent shade of red. He slammed his hand on the table. "This is preposterous." The old man was senile. He must have been confused. "Nina? He left it to Nina?" He turned to look at me, and for the first time in years, he really saw me. But he did not see his daughter. He saw a thief. "She is a warehouse manager," my father shouted. his voice cracking. "She knows nothing about corporate finance. She knows nothing about running a multinational conglomerate. This is negligence. I will contest this. This is insanity." My mother, however, was faster. She was always the more dangerous one because she could shift her shape to fit the container. She saw the rage on my father's face and realized it was the wrong play. She saw the calmness on my face, and she recalculated. "Richard, stop it," she hissed at him. She turned to me, her face softened, the greed vanished, replaced by a mask of terrified concern. She reached across the table, her manicured fingers trembling as she sought my hand. I did not pull away, but I did not return the grip. "Nina, darling," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Oh, my poor sweet girl, you must be in shock." I looked at her. "I am quite calm." "Mother," I said. "Of course you are," she said, rushing over her words. "But this is a burden, a terrible burden. Walter did not know what he was doing to you. Dumping $3.8 billion on a young woman's shoulders? It is dangerous. Nina, there are wolves out there, people who will want to take advantage of you." She looked at my father, signaling him with her eyes. My father caught the cue. He smoothed his tie, forcing his breathing to slow. He sat back down, composing his features into a mask of paternal authority. "Your mother is right, Nina," he said, his voice dropping to a reasonable, deep timbre. "We are not angry, we are just concerned. You have lived a simple life. You are not prepared for the complexity of tax shelters, offshore compliance, or board politics. If you try to handle this alone, you will lose it all within a year, or worse, you will go to prison for regulatory oversight." I watched them work. It was fascinating. 5 minutes ago, I was invisible. Now, I was a helpless child who needed to be saved from her own fortune. "We can fix this," my mother said, squeezing my hand tighter. "We will help you. We are a family. We do not need to fight." "Here is what we will do," my father said, pulling a pen from his pocket as if he were already drafting the agreement. "We will form a family council. I will step in as the chief executive officer to handle the operations. Lucas can take over the investment arm since he has the vision. Your mother will manage the philanthropic side. You, Nina, can take a seat on the board. You will be safe. You will have a generous allowance. $50 million a year. You will never have to work at that loading dock again. You can travel. You can buy a house in Paris. Let us carry the heavy load for you." Lucas nodded eagerly. "Yeah, Nina, seriously, you do not want this headache. I mean, $3.8 billion? That is just a number. It is actually a nightmare of paperwork. Let Dad handle it." The arrogance was breathtaking. They were not asking me. They were telling me how they were going to strip mine my inheritance before the ink was even dry. They assumed I would be grateful. They assumed I was the same scared 18-year-old girl who had walked out with a suitcase. I looked at the lawyer. Mr. Thorne was watching me, waiting. I slowly withdrew my hand from my mother's grip. She looked hurt, a flash of genuine confusion crossing her face. "I appreciate your concern," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the acoustically perfect room, it carried like a bell, but I do not recall asking for help. My father's smile faltered. "Nina, be reasonable. This is not the time for teenage rebellion. We are talking about the Austen legacy." "I am the Austen legacy," I said. Walter seemed to think so. My father's eyes narrowed. He looked like he was about to lunge across the table. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little—" Mr. Thorne cleared his throat. It was a loud, sharp sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "If you are quite finished with your negotiations," he said, looking at my father with disdain, "there is more to the will." My father froze. "More? What do you mean, more? You said she was the sole beneficiary." "I did." "Mr. Thorne said, but Mr. Austen was a man of detail. He anticipated that there might be some resistance to his decision. He turned a page in the document. "There are conditions attached to the inheritance," Mr. Thorne said, "and there are specific clauses regarding the management of the estate. My mother paled. Conditions? Mr. Thorne looked directly at my father. Clause 4, Section A. He read, "The beneficiary, Nina Austin, is granted total and absolute executive authority over all assets immediately upon my death. Furthermore, any attempt by any family member to coerce, manipulate, or legally force the beneficiary into a trust, a guardianship, or a shared management structure will result in immediate consequences." He looked up. Walter called it the No Puppeteers Clause, Mr. Thorne said, and he left very specific instructions on what happens if you try to break it. My father sank back into his chair. The room felt colder. I looked at the folder in Mr. Thorne's hands and knew that the trap Walter had spent years building was about to snap shut. The money was not the gift. The control was the gift, and the weapon was about to be revealed. Mr. Thorne did not look at my father. He looked down at the document, his finger tracing the line of text with the precision of a surgeon locating an artery. Clause 5, Subsection B, regarding the autonomy of the heir. He read aloud. His voice was devoid of theatrics, which made the words land with even more crushing weight. It is the express wish of the testator that Nina Austin shall manage the estate without the encumbrance of familial interference. Therefore, any attempt by Richard Austin, Elena Austin, or Lucas Austin to petition a court for a conservatorship, to enforce a board of regents, or to coerce the beneficiary into signing a power of attorney will be considered a direct violation of this will. My father made a noise that sounded like a strangulated gasp, but Thorne was not finished. Furthermore, he continued, flipping the page, to ensure the integrity of the estate, Mr. Austin has appointed an external auditor with veto power over any structural changes to the holding company during the transition period. That auditor is Redcliffe Advisory. The name hit the room like a physical blow, but only I understood its impact. My father frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. Redcliffe? He asked, looking at my mother. Who is Redcliffe? I have never heard of them. Are they a Wall Street firm? A boutique consultancy? They are an independent oversight body, Thorne said smoothly, and they have been granted a perpetual mandate to audit the personal finances of any family member receiving a stipend from the estate. They report solely to Nina Austin. I allowed myself a small, private breath of relief. Walter had not just given me the shield, he had given me the sword. Redcliffe was not just a consultancy, it was the surveillance network he had spent the last 5 years building. My father was asking who they were, unaware that they likely already had a copy of his Cayman Islands bank statements. "This is absurd," my mother cried out. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is not Walter's writing. This is her doing. She spent every Sunday with him for years. She brainwashed him. She took advantage of a sick, dying old man to rewrite his will and cut out his own children." She turned to Thorne, her eyes wild. "We will not accept this. We know the law. This creates an undue concentration of wealth in the hands of an unqualified individual. We will file a motion for incompetence. We will sue for undue influence. We will tie this estate up in probate court for the next 10 years if we have to." My father nodded vigorously, finding his voice again. "Exactly. You think you can walk away with $3.8 billion while we sit here? I built the connections that keep this company alive. I am the face of Austin Industries. If you think I will let my daughter destroy my legacy, you are mistaken. We will contest this will immediately." Thorne did not flinch. He did not look worried. He simply waited for them to stop shouting. He took off his reading glasses and folded them slowly, placing them on top of the leather portfolio. "I would strongly advise against that." "Richard," Thorne said. "Do not tell me what to do," my father shouted. "I am hiring my own counsel the minute I walk out of this door." "If you do," Thorne said, raising his voice just enough to cut through the noise, "you will trigger the forfeiture clause." The room went dead silent. My father froze. "Forfeiture clause?" Thorne tapped the document. "Mr. Austin anticipated that you would react this way. He knew you would threaten litigation. He knew you would try to use the courts to claw back control. That is why he included Clause 9. Thorne looked directly at my mother, then at Lucas, and finally settled his gaze on my father. Clause 9 states that there is a secondary trust, known as the Family Maintenance Fund. This fund contains a principal sum of $50 million. The interest from this fund is designed to provide a monthly stipend to Richard, Elena, and Lucas Austin, ensuring you can maintain your current lifestyle. It acts as a safety net. He paused for effect. However, Thorne continued, the clause is explicit. If any of the named parties contest the validity of this will, or file any legal action against Nina Austin regarding the management of the estate, the Family Maintenance Fund is immediately and irrevocably dissolved. The entire $50 million will be transferred directly to the feline rescue charity of the city, and the monthly stipends will cease effective immediately. My mother collapsed back into her chair. Her face went ashen. 0, Thorne said softly. That is what you will get if you sue. No allowance, no trust fund, no coverage for your mortgages or your club memberships. You will be cut off completely. The brutality of it was breathtaking. Walter had known exactly how to bind them. He knew that their greed was powerful, but their fear of poverty was stronger. They could fight me for the billions, but to do so, they would have to risk the millions that kept them fed and clothed. It was a golden cage. They were trapped. Lucas, who had been staring at the table, suddenly kicked his chair back. He stood up, his face flushed with a dangerous, unstable anger. He looked at me with pure hatred. You knew about this, he spat. You sat there in that warehouse playing the poor little worker girl, but you knew. You were plotting this the whole time. I looked up at him. I did not blink. I did not know the details. Lucas, but I knew grandfather. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the water glasses. It is my money. I am the son. I am the one who is supposed to carry the name. You are nothing. You are a nobody. Mr. Austin, sit down, Thorne commanded, his voice sharp, or I will have security remove you. I do not care about your security, Lucas yelled. He took a step toward me, his hands balled into fists. You think this piece of paper protects you? You think you can just take everything? Watch your back. Nina, you have no idea what happens when you cross family. I did not flinch. I did not recoil. I watched him with the same detached observation I used when a supplier tried to intimidate me over a late shipment. Are you threatening me? Lucas? I asked. My voice was calm, almost bored. He stopped, breathing hard. His eyes darted to the recording device in the center of the table. He realized, too late, that he was on the record. I am just saying, he muttered, backing down but still sneering. It is a lot of money. Accidents happen. Bad investments happen. Thorne stood up. That is enough. The reading is concluded. The assets transfer immediately. Mrs. Austin, Mr. Austin, Lucas, I suggest you go home and read the copies of the will I have prepared for you. Pay special attention to the stipend schedule. It is generous, provided you remain compliant. My parents stood up. They looked broken. My father looked 10 years older than he had when he walked in. He looked at me one last time, waiting for me to say something, to offer a compromise, to share the spoils. He was waiting for the daughter who used to seek his approval. He did not find her. I stayed seated as they shuffled out. My mother was weeping again, but this time it was the real, terrified weeping of a woman who realized her credit card limits were no longer infinite. Lucas slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. When we were finally alone, the silence in the room was heavy and sweet. Thorne let out a long sigh and sat back down. He looked at me, his professional mask slipping just a fraction to reveal a tired, kindly old man. He knew they would be difficult, Thorne said, but he hoped they would be smarter. They are who they are, I said. Thorne reached into his portfolio one last time. He pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with Walter's personal signet ring. He asked me to give you this only after the others had left. Thorne said. He said it was for your eyes only. I took the envelope. It felt heavy in my hand. Heavier than paper should feel. My name was written on the front in Walter's shaky, spidery handwriting. Do you want to open it now? Thorne asked. I ran my thumb over the wax seal. I could feel the texture of the imprint. I thought about the chess games. I thought about the silence of the library. I thought about the lessons on leverage and patience. Walter had already said everything he needed to say in the legal text. This was something else. This was the final piece of the strategy. Or perhaps, the only piece of affection he allowed himself to leave behind. No, I said, not here. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my simple black dress. I picked up the folder containing the summary of my $3.8 billion empire. Is there anything else, Mr. Thorne? I asked. The lawyer shook his head. He looked at me with a strange expression. I think I finally understand why he chose you. Nina, you did not ask how much your allowance was. You did not ask how to buy a jet. You just accepted the weight. It is not a weight, Mr. Thorne. I said, it is a job, and I am good at my job. I walked to the door. I did not look back at the empty chairs where my family had sat. I did not look at the view of the city that now belonged to me. I walked out of the office, past the stunned receptionists, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, isolating me in the quiet steel box, I looked at the letter in my hand. I did not open it. I slipped it into my purse. I felt a small, cold smile touch my lips. The trap was set, the cage was locked, and my family, in their arrogance, had walked right into it. Now, the real work began. The silence following the reading of the will lasted exactly 48 hours. It was the calm before the inevitable storm, a period where my family retreated to their respective corners to lick their wounds and, as I anticipated, to look for loopholes. They were not people who accepted defeat. They were people who renegotiated reality until it suited them. I spent those 2 days inside my condo, not hiding, but preparing. I had 2 secure laptops set up on my dining table, both connected to the encrypted server that Walter had established for Redcliffe Advisory. The interface was stark and minimalist, a black screen with scrolling lines of data that represented the heartbeat of the Austin Empire. On the morning of the 3rd day, the first strike arrived. It did not come in the form of a lawsuit contesting the will. They were too afraid of the forfeiture clause to do that. Instead, they chose a more insidious route. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. It was a copy of a filing submitted to the probate court. My father and mother had jointly filed a petition for asset supervision. The language was masterpieces of passive-aggressive legal maneuvering. They were not claiming the will was invalid. They were claiming that I, due to my lack of financial experience and historical estrangement from corporate affairs, was a risk to the stability of the assets. They were asking the court to appoint a familial advisory committee to oversee all transactions over $10,000 until a competency hearing could be held. It was clever. They were trying to strangle me with red tape without technically triggering the penalty for contesting the inheritance. I picked up the phone and dialed the number Walter had made me memorize. It has begun, I said when the line connected. Understood, a voice replied. It was Marcus, the operational head of Redcliffe. We are monitoring the docket, but there is more. You need to look at your secure dashboard. We have detected activity. I refreshed the screen on my laptop. A red alert blinked in the corner. Attempted access. The log read, Origin, Private VPN, Target, Austin Industries Treasury Portal. Someone is trying to get into the corporate accounts, Marcus said. It is clumsy. They are using a brute force password cracker. It is not sophisticated enough to be a professional hacker. It screams of desperation. I watched the lines of code scrolling as the Redcliffe firewall repelled the attack effortlessly. Who is it? I asked. We traced the IP address through the VPN leak. Marcus said, the signal resolves to a luxury condominium complex in the downtown district. The registered owner of the internet service provider account is Lucas Austin. I almost laughed. Lucas? Of course. He was trying to hack a multi-billion-dollar system from his living room sofa, probably thinking he was being subtle. Let him keep trying, I said. Do not block him completely. Just bounce him. I want a record of every attempt. I want to know exactly which accounts he is targeting. He is going for the liquid cash reserves, Marcus noted. He is trying to transfer $200,000 to a shell company in Nevis. Document it, I said, every keystroke. The next mistake came that afternoon, and it was so egregious I wondered if they were subconsciously trying to get caught. My phone pinged with an email notification. It was from Lucas. The subject line was, "Talking points for press release." I frowned. Why would Lucas send me this? I opened it. Nick, the email began. Nick was their crisis PR manager. Here is the angle for the leak. We need to emphasize that she has a history of social isolation. Use the word unstable, but keep it off the record. Plant the seed that she is overwhelmed and having a breakdown. We need the board to panic so they back Dad's petition for supervision. Attached are the photos of her apartment building. Make it look run down. Let's paint her as a recluse who can't handle the spotlight. I stared at the screen. He had meant to send it to Nick, but because my name was Nina, his email client had likely auto-completed my address, and in his haste, he had hit send without checking. I did not reply. I did not delete it. I forwarded it immediately to the secure Redcliffe server. Received, Marcus messaged back instantly. We have archived the metadata. This proves malicious intent to defame and manipulate the stock price. The stage was set. They were coming for me from the legal side and the media side, but they needed one more thing. They needed me to look weak in person. At 7 o'clock that evening, my buzzer rang. The concierge told me my mother was in the lobby. Let her up, I said. I quickly moved the laptops into my bedroom and locked the door. I went to the small safe in the closet and activated the audio recording system that Redcliffe had installed in my living room the day after the funeral. It was high fidelity, capable of picking up a whisper from across the room. I messed up my hair slightly. I changed from my crisp button-down shirt into an oversized cardigan. I wanted to look small. I wanted to look tired. When I opened the door, my mother was standing there holding a Tupperware container in a leather folder. She looked immaculate, her face a portrait of maternal concern. Nina, darling, she cooed, stepping inside without waiting for an invite. I brought you some lasagna. I know you probably haven't been eating with all this stress. She scanned the apartment. It was neat, minimal, and far too modest for a billionaire, which I knew offended her sensibilities. She set the lasagna on the counter and turned to me, her eyes sweeping over my slumped posture. You look exhausted, she said, reaching out to touch my cheek. Her hand was cold. It has been a lot. Mom, I said, allowing my voice to waver. The phone won't stop ringing. The lawyers, the numbers. It is all so much. I led her to the sofa. She sat down close to me, too close. I know, sweetie, she said. That is what your father and I are so worried about. Walter. He was not thinking clearly. He dumped the weight of the world on you. It is cruel, really. You are not built for this kind of pressure. You are a creative soul. Nina, you need peace. I looked down at my hands. I don't know where to start, I whispered. My mother opened the leather folder. That is why we want to help, she said softly. We don't want to take the money. Nina, it is yours. We just want to take the burden. She pulled out a document. It was thick, bound with a blue cover. Your father drafted this up with the legal team. It is just a temporary care agreement. It appoints us as your financial proxies. It means we handle the meetings, the board votes, the tax filings. You just sign here, and you can go back to your life. You can quit that awful job at the warehouse. You can rest. We will send you a monthly report, and you will have full access, of course, but you won't have the headaches. She held out a gold pen. Just sign it, baby. Let Mommy and Daddy take care of the scary parts. I looked at the document. The text was dense, but I recognized the keywords Walter had taught me. Irrevocable power of attorney. Unilateral decision-making authority. It wasn't a care agreement. It was a surrender. If I signed this, I would effectively be handing them the keys to the kingdom, and I would never get them back. I reached out and took the pen. My hand trembled. A calculated performance. "And this will stop the court petition?" I asked. My mother's eyes widened slightly. She didn't know I had received the filing yet. She recovered quickly. "Oh, that silly thing? That is just a formality. Darling, once you sign this, we withdraw that immediately. We just wanted to make sure the assets were safe until we could talk to you." I held the pen over the paper. I watched her pupils dilate. She was hungry. She was so close to getting what she wanted that she could taste it. I need to read it first. "Mom," I said, pulling the paper back, "I can't just sign it without reading it." Disappointment flashed across her face, sharp and ugly, before she smoothed it over. "Of course, Nina. But don't take too long. The market's open at 9 tomorrow. We need to stabilize things." I stood up, hugging the folder to my chest. "I will read it tonight. I promise." She stood up too, trying to hide her irritation. "Okay, call me the second you are done. We are doing this for you. Nina, remember that." I walked her to the door. As she left, she looked back, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw the calculation. She was already planning which gala she would host to announce her return to power. "Get some sleep," she said. "You look terrible." I closed the door and locked it. I waited until I heard the elevator ding. Then, I walked back to the living room, straightened my back, and picked up the phone. "Did you get that?" I asked. "Every word," Marcus replied. "We have her on tape admitting the court petition is a leverage tool and that the proxy agreement is intended to bypass the will. We also have her lying about the nature of the document." "Good," I said. "Add it to the file." The next morning, the media assault began. I woke up to alerts on my phone. The headlines were brutal. "The Recluse Heiress. Can Nina Austin handle the billions?" "Insiders say Austin estate in chaos as unqualified granddaughter takes helm." "Sources close to family fear, mental health crisis, for new billionaire." They were running with Lucas's narrative. The articles cited anonymous family friends who claimed I was emotionally unstable, lived in squalor, and had a history of erratic behavior. They painted my parents as the concerned saviors trying to step in before I destroyed the company. I drank my coffee and read every word. I did not issue a denial. I did not call a press conference. I let the stories run. I let them build the narrative. My silence emboldened them. By noon, Lucas was tweeting vague messages about duty and protecting the legacy. My father gave a no comment to a reporter that was delivered with a heavy sigh, implying that the situation was tragic. They thought they were burying me. They thought my silence was paralysis. They did not understand that in the world of logistics, you do not react to every bump in the road. You wait until the cargo is secure, and then you check the manifest. I sat at my table, watching the Redcliffe dashboard. "They are escalating," Marcus said. "Your father just contacted 2 board members of the holding company. He is trying to schedule an emergency vote of no confidence in your ownership. He is using the press reports as evidence of your instability." "Let him," I said. "Let him call the vote." "But if the board turns," Marcus started. "The board won't turn," I said, "because before that meeting happens, they are going to see the truth." I looked at the stack of evidence growing on my digital drive. The hacking logs, the email from Lucas, the recording of my mother, the court filing. It was a perfect picture of conspiracy and fraud. My family was dancing on the edge of a cliff, and they were so busy trying to push me off that they didn't realize the ground beneath them was crumbling. I opened the safe again and took out the letter Walter had left me. I ran my finger over the seal. "Not yet," I whispered. "Let them go a little further. Let them think they have won." I turned back to the screen. "Marcus," I said, "get the legal team ready for a counterfiling. But do not file it yet. I want to wait until the hearing for their petition. I want to do this in open court." "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "It will be public. It will be messy." I looked at the headline on the screen calling me unstable. "They wanted a show," I said. I am going to give them one, but they are not going to like the ending. The courtroom was a study in beige and brown, a windowless box designed to drain the emotion out of life-altering disputes, yet the air inside was thick enough to choke on. My parents and Lucas sat on the plaintiff's side, a portrait of respectable concern. My mother was wearing a navy suit that suggested modesty, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My father was whispering to their attorney, a man with a reputation for aggression named Steinberg. Lucas was there, looking less confident than he had in the boardroom, his eyes darting toward the gallery where a few reporters had gathered. They had painted a masterpiece of fiction in their filing. According to the documents sitting before Judge Holloway, I was a recluse, a woman paralyzed by social anxiety and emotionally unfit to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a conglomerate worth $3.8 billion. I sat alone at the defendant's table, flanked only by Sarah Vance, a litigator from the Redcliffe Network. She was sharp, precise, and entirely unimpressed by Steinberg's theatrics. I wore a simple gray blazer. I had no tissues. I had no support team. I had only the file folder resting on the table in front of me. Judge Holloway adjusted his spectacles and looked down at the assembly. We are here to hear the emergency petition for temporary conservatorship regarding the estate of Walter Austin. He said, Mr. Steinberg, you may proceed. Steinberg stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look at me. He looked at the judge with a pained expression. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and grave, this is a tragedy. We are not here to contest the late Mr. Austin's will. We are here to protect his legacy and, more importantly, to protect his granddaughter. Nina Austin has lived a life of extreme isolation for the past 12 years. She has no experience with finance. She has no support system. Since the reading of the will, she has exhibited signs of severe distress. He gestured to an affidavit. We have a sworn statement here from her mother, Elena Austin, detailing a visit to Nina's apartment just 2 nights ago. Ms. Austin was found in a state of disarray, unable to comprehend basic legal documents, and trembling with anxiety. She admitted to being overwhelmed. She admitted she did not know where to start. The family is simply asking to step in as interim stewards to prevent the estate from collapsing while Nina receives the care she needs. My mother dabbed at her eyes. It was a perfect performance. Judge Holloway looked at me. Ms. Austin, he said, do you have a response? Sarah Vance stood up. She did not use flowery language. She did not feign emotion. She picked up a remote control and pointed it at the screen mounted on the wall. Your Honor, we move to dismiss this petition immediately with prejudice. Sarah said, the narrative presented by the plaintiffs is not only false, it is a calculated fabrication designed to circumvent the explicit non-interference clause of the decedent's will. Steinberg jumped up. Objection. This is speculation. It is not speculation, Sarah said calmly. It is data. She clicked the remote. The screen flickered to life. Exhibit A, Sarah announced. Projected on the screen was the email Lucas had sent me by mistake. The subject line, talking points for press release, was magnified. The text was damning. Paint her as a recluse. Use the word unstable. Make the board panic. A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. Lucas turned a shade of pale that matched the walls. My father stiffened. This email was sent from the plaintiff's personal account 2 days ago. Sarah continued. It clearly demonstrates that the concern for my client's mental health is a pre-manufactured public relations strategy, not a genuine medical observation. Steinberg tried to rally. Your Honor, this is taken out of context. It is just protective planning. Sarah did not let him finish. She clicked the remote again. Exhibit B, she said. The audio waveform appeared on the screen. Sarah pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, clear and crisp, recorded from my living room. Once you sign this, we withdraw that immediately. We just wanted to make sure the assets were safe until we could talk to you. Sarah paused the recording. This recording was taken during the visit where the plaintiffs claim my client was incoherent. Sarah said, as you can hear, Mrs. Austin explicitly admits that this court petition is being used as leverage to coerce my client into signing a power of attorney. This is an abuse of the court system, Your Honor. They are using this bench as a bargaining chip. My mother stopped dabbing her eyes. She looked at me with a gaze that could have cut glass. I did not look away. I maintained the neutral expression of an observer watching a shipment get rejected at customs. Sarah was not done. Finally, Exhibit C, she said. The screen changed to show a complex log of server requests. Lines of red text stood out against a black background. This is a security log from the Northline Freight Systems Treasury Portal and the Austin Industries Central Server, Sarah explained. Over the last 48 hours, there were 42 attempts to bypass the firewall using a brute force algorithm. She pointed to the bottom of the screen. The IP address has been traced to the residence of Lucas Austin. Lucas sank low in his chair. Steinberg looked down at his papers, realizing he had been sent into a gunfight with a water pistol. These are not the actions of a concerned family, Your Honor, Sarah concluded. These are the actions of hostile actors attempting to seize control of assets they were explicitly denied. This petition is a fraudulent attempt to bypass the forfeiture clause of the will. Judge Holloway looked at the screen, then at my family. His expression had shifted from neutral to severe. Mr. Steinberg, the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, do you have an explanation for why your client is attempting to hack the estate he claims he wants to protect? Steinberg stammered, Your Honor, I was not made aware of these technical details. I stood up then. It was the first time I had moved. Your Honor, I said, my voice was steady. May I approach the bench? The judge looked at me. He saw a woman who was composed, articulate, and standing straight. He did not see the fragile girl described in the filing. You may, Ms. Austin. I walked forward, holding the cream-colored envelope that Thorne had given me at the law office. The wax seal was broken, but the paper was pristine. My grandfather, Walter Austin, was a man of foresight. I said, he anticipated this moment. He gave me this letter with instructions to open it only if my family attempted to legally intervene in my management of the estate. I believe it is relevant to your ruling. I unfolded the letter. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. I read aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. To the presiding judge, I read, if you are reading this, it means my son, Richard, and his wife have filed a petition claiming my granddaughter, Nina, is incompetent. They likely cited her quiet nature as mental instability. They likely claimed they only want to help. I looked up at my father. He was staring at the letter as if it were a ghost. I continued reading. Do not be fooled. Richard does not care about Nina's health. He cares about the voting rights attached to her shares. I have spent the last decade watching Nina build a life from nothing with zero support from these people. She is the only Austin with the competence to run this company. This petition is not a rescue mission. It is a robbery. I urge the court to dismiss it and to remind my family that their allowance depends on their silence. I lowered the paper. Signed, Walter Jameson Austin. I handed the letter to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Holloway examined the handwriting. He nodded slowly. He looked over his glasses at my parents. It seems the decedent knew you better than you know yourselves, Judge Holloway said. He slammed his gavel down. The sound was like a thunderclap. The petition for conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice, the judge declared. There is zero evidence of incapacity on the part of the defendant. In fact, she seems to be the only one in this room acting with prudence. He leaned forward, locking eyes with my father. And Mr. Austin, let me be very clear. If I see this family in my court again with another frivolous motion, or if I hear one more report of cyber intrusion, I will personally sanction the immediate activation of the forfeiture clause. You are skating on very thin ice. Do not waste my time again. Court is adjourned. The judge stood up and swept out of the room. The silence that followed was heavy. My lawyer, Sarah, began packing her briefcase. I did the same. I did not celebrate. I did not smile. I turned to leave. To get to the exit, I had to pass their table. My father was sitting with his head in his hands. My mother was staring at the wall, her face pale. Lucas was typing furiously on his phone, likely trying to scrub his hard drive, unaware that Redcliffe already had everything. As I passed them, my father looked up. His eyes were red. "Nina," he croaked. I stopped. I did not turn my body toward him. I just paused. We can still fix this," he said, his voice desperate. "We can work together. The company needs experience." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had cut me off at 18 to teach me a lesson. "I have experience. Dad," I said, "I have 12 years of experience learning how to survive you." I walked away. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the hallway. The reporters were waiting, microphones raised, shouting questions. "Ms. Austin, is it true you are cutting them off? What is your first move as CEO? Do you hate your family?" I ignored them all. I kept my eyes forward, my pace steady. I walked through the flashbulbs and the noise, entering the elevator that was held open by a Redcliffe security officer. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the chaos, I let out a long breath. I checked my watch. It was 10:30 in the morning. I had a meeting with the board of directors at 1 o'clock. I had a logistics empire to run. The courtroom victory was not the end. It was just the clearance of an obstacle. My family had fired their best shot, and it had bounced off the armor Walter had left me. Now, they were defenseless, and I had a lot of work to do. The first thing I did after the gavel came down was not to buy a yacht or a penthouse. I went back to work, but this time, work was not the loading dock at Northline Freight. It was the executive suite on the top floor of the Austin Tower. The transition was surgical. I did not move into the family estate. I stayed in my condo, but I had Redcliffe sweep it for bugs twice a day. I replaced my car with a bulletproof sedan, driven by a man named Elias, who spoke 3 languages and had a permit for the weapon holstered under his jacket. I understood now that wealth was not just about purchasing power, it was about insulation. My first order of business as the new owner was to sanitize the operation. I spent the first week in a conference room with Marcus and a team of forensic auditors. We were not looking for profit margins. We were looking for rot. I needed to know exactly where the tendrils of my parents' influence had wrapped themselves around the company's assets. The audit was brutal. It revealed that my family had treated the corporation like a personal piggy bank, albeit one they had to raid secretly. There were consulting fees paid to shell companies owned by my mother's bridge partners. There were charitable donations to foundations that employed my father's golf buddies. It was a web of soft corruption, designed to buy social capital with shareholder money. But the real horror story was Lucas. On Thursday afternoon, Marcus projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. It was a debt analysis of a company called Velacorp, a startup my brother had founded 2 years ago. "You need to look at line 40, Marcus said. I scanned the numbers. My stomach turned. Velacorp was not just failing. It was a corpse that was still walking because it was being propped up by high-interest loans. $8 million, I read aloud. He owes $8 million in private bridge loans? It gets worse, Marcus said. Look at the collateral column. I looked. Beside the staggering debt figure, in the column for secured assets, was a note. Guarantee pending, W, Austin Estate Liquidity Event. My father had done it. He had gone to private lenders, sharks, really, and promised them that as soon as Walter died, he would use the inheritance to wipe Lucas's slate clean. He had leveraged a fortune he did not own to save a son who could not be saved. "This is fraud," I said quietly, or at least misrepresentation. "It is leverage for us," Marcus corrected. "The lenders are getting nervous. They saw the news about the court ruling. They know your father is not in charge. They are going to come calling, and when they realize the tap is dry, they will sue." I nodded. I realized that my father's desperation in court hadn't just been about greed, it had been about survival. He had made promises he couldn't keep, and now the bill collectors were at the gate. I closed the file, set up a meeting with the board of the holding company. I said, "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock." The next morning, I walked into the boardroom. It was a cavernous space dominated by a table long enough to land a plane on. 12 men and 3 women sat around it. These were the titans of industry. The people who had played golf with Walter. The people who viewed me as an anomaly. I did not sit at the head of the table. I remained standing. I placed my hands on the leather back of the chair that used to be Walter's. "Good morning," I said. My voice was steady. "I know many of you have questions about the transition. I know some of you have concerns about my background." I looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. Finally, my gaze landed on Mr. Henderson. He was a silver-haired banking tycoon who had been my father's closest ally on the board. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "I was reviewing the discretionary spending accounts yesterday." The room went silent. Henderson cleared his throat. "Is there a problem, Ms. Austin?" he asked, his tone patronizing. "I think there is," I said. "I found a tentative agreement for Austin Industries to acquire a logistics software firm called Velacorp for $12 million. The valuation seems optimistic, considering the company has 0 revenue and $8 million in debt." Henderson turned red. That was a preliminary discussion. Your father believed it had synergy." "My father is not the CEO," I said, "and he is not a shareholder." I walked over to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. I wrote a single word: 0. "This is the amount of family influence that will remain in this company," I said. I turned back to them. "I know that Richard Austin promised favors. I know he promised acquisitions to bail out bad investments. I know he leveraged his social connections to secure votes in this room." I looked directly at Henderson. "If you have a side deal with my father, kill it. If you have a promise from him, forget it. If I find out that anyone in this room is acting as a proxy for Richard or Lucas Austin, I will not just fire you, I will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty, and I will make sure every newspaper in the city knows why." Henderson looked down at his notepad. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the realization that the game had changed. "Do we understand each other?" I asked. A ripple of nods went around the table. "Good," I said. "Now, let's talk about the future." I didn't stop at the boardroom. I knew that my parents' power didn't just come from money. It came from their standing in the city's elite circles. They were the kings and queens of the gala circuit. They used Walter's name to host events, to hand out giant checks, to be seen as the benevolent patrons of the arts. That social capital was the oxygen they breathed. I decided to cut off the air supply. 2 weeks after the board meeting, I announced the creation of the Walter Austin Fellowship. My mother had been planning the annual Austin Summer Ball for months. It was the highlight of her social calendar. She had already sent out save-the-date cards. She expected to use the estate's funds to pay for the catering, the venue, and the orchestra, as she always had. I canceled the check. Instead, I directed the funds, $5 million, into a new program. I didn't hire a party planner. I hired an educational consultant. We designed a scholarship fund for students from the working-class neighborhoods where I had spent the last decade. It was for the kids who worked night shifts to pay for community college, the ones who knew what it meant to be tired. I scheduled the launch event for the same night as my mother's planned ball. I held it at the city library, in the grand atrium. I invited the press, the mayor, and the entire board of directors. The invitation list was specific. Everyone was invited, except for Richard, Elena, and Lucas Austin. On the night of the event, I wore a simple white suit, no diamonds, no tiara, just clean lines. I stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the flashbulbs. I saw the curiosity. My grandfather believed in value. I said into the microphone, he didn't believe in inheritance. He believed in investment. For too long, the Austin name has been associated with exclusivity. Tonight, we changed that. I looked at the camera at the back of the room, knowing the feed was being live-streamed. "This money is not for parties," I said. "It is for potential." The next morning, The society pages were full of photos of me handing out certificates to students. The headlines were glowing. The New Austin Era. Substance over style. Nina Austin redefines philanthropy. And buried on page 6 was a small blurb about the cancellation of the summer ball due to unforeseen logistical issues. My phone rang at 10 o'clock. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later. Her voice was shrill, cracking with humiliation. "How could you?" she screamed. "The Andersons called me to ask why they weren't invited. The mayor's wife asked if we were ill. You humiliated us. Nina, you stole our friends." I deleted the message. She was wrong. I hadn't stolen their friends. I had simply revealed the truth. Their friends were never really theirs. They were Walter's. They were the money's. And the money had moved. The isolation was working. I could feel the shift in the city's atmosphere. When I walked into a restaurant, the maitre d' didn't ask about my father. He led me to the best table. When the board members emailed, they CC'd me, not my father. But the final blow to their illusion of control came from the audit of the estate's physical assets. I sent a team to inventory the family manor where my parents still lived. Technically, the house belonged to the trust, which meant it belonged to me. They were tenants at will. The inventory report came back with a discrepancy. Missing items, the report read: 3 original oil paintings from the East Wing, a set of 19th century silver, a vintage Jaguar E-Type from the garage. I called Marcus. "Where are they?" "Sold," Marcus said. "We tracked the Jaguar to a private collector in Miami. The sale date was 3 days ago. The wire transfer went to an account controlled by your father. He was liquidating the furniture to pay the debts he had hidden from me. He was stripping the copper wire out of the walls." "Send a notice," I said. My voice was cold. "A notice of eviction?" Marcus asked. "No," I said. "Not yet. Send a notice of theft. Tell them they have 24 hours to return the assets or the value of the assets, or we file a police report." "But they can't return it," Marcus said. "They spent the money on the loan interest." "I know," I said. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city lights. I remembered the day I left home with one suitcase. I remembered how they watched me go, convinced I would come crawling back when I ran out of cash. They had used money as a leash. Now, the leash was in my hand, and I was not pulling it. I was just holding it still, letting them choke themselves on their own panic. "They are going to come to you," Marcus warned. "They are going to beg." "Let them come," I said. "I am ready." The attack arrived on a Monday morning, hidden inside the glossy pages of a national business weekly. It was not a clumsy tabloid piece like the ones before. This was a sophisticated hit job, penned by a journalist known for destroying C-suite careers. The headline was screaming in bold black font: "The Austin Sellout. Is the heiress liquidating an American legacy?" The article was a masterclass in distortion. It claimed that I was secretly negotiating to break up Austin Industries and sell the logistics arm, the very heart of the company, to a foreign consortium for quick cash. It cited confidential internal memos and worried executives. It painted me not just as incompetent, but as a corporate raider of my own bloodline, a woman looking to cash out and run, leaving thousands of American workers unemployed. I sat in my office, reading the digital copy on my tablet. My pulse did not race. I did not throw the tablet against the wall. I sipped my espresso and pressed the intercom button. "Marcus," I said, "it is time." Marcus walked in a moment later. He was holding a printout of the same article. "It is bad," he said. "The stock is down 4% in pre-market trading. The board is blowing up my phone. They are demanding an emergency session." "Let them panic for an hour," I said. "It makes them more receptive to the truth." "Did you trace the source?" "We can't trace the journalist's source directly," Marcus said. "He is protecting his leak. But the narrative is specific. It mentions a Project Vulture. We never had a Project Vulture." "Exactly," I said, "because the leak is fabricated. But the intent is real. My family is trying to turn the shareholders against me. They want to create a panic so severe that the board invokes the emergency removal clause for gross negligence. I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked peaceful from 40 floors up, but I knew the sharks were circling. "We are going to give them what they want," I said. "They want inside information? Let's give it to them." We initiated the protocol Walter had named the Canary Trap. It was a classic espionage technique, simple but devastatingly effective. If you suspect a leak but don't know which pipe is bursting, you pour a different color of dye into each pipe and wait to see what color the water is at the bottom of the hill. We spent the afternoon drafting 3 distinct documents. Each one looked like an official, top secret executive summary. Each one was stamped confidential, eyes only, and each one contained a completely different, explosive lie. For my father, we created a document detailing a plan to merge Austin Industries with our biggest domestic competitor, a move that would dilute the family name but double the stock price. We called it Project Unity. For my mother, we drafted a memo outlining a massive, hidden tax liability that would require selling the family estates to pay off the IRS. We called it Project Shelter. And for Lucas, we created the most volatile narrative of all. We drafted a report stating that I had discovered $1 billion in unrecorded assets and was planning to issue a special one-time dividend of $50 million to family members to buy their silence before taking the company private. We called it Project Golden Parachute. We watermarked the files, not with visible stamps, but with syntax. In my father's document, we used the phrase strategic alignment 3 times. In my mother's, we used fiscal rectification. In Lucas's, we used liquidity event. We also embedded a unique, invisible pixel in the PDF that would ping our server the moment the file was opened. The delivery method was crucial. It had to look like a mistake. We used a burner email account, spoofing the address of my executive assistant. We sent the emails at 2 a.m. with a subject line that read, "Draft for board review. Do not forward." Then we waited. The ping from Lucas's computer came at 6 a.m. He was awake early. The ping from my father came at 7. My mother opened hers at 8:30, likely over breakfast. They were starving dogs, and I had just thrown them 3 separate pieces of poisoned meat. The explosion happened 24 hours later. I was in the middle of a strategy meeting when Marcus nodded at me from the doorway. I excused myself. "It is up," Marcus said. "The Daily Chronicle just posted an exclusive." I looked at the headline on his phone. "Secret payout. Austin heiress plans $50 million hush money dividend to silence family critics." I smiled. It was Lucas. The article quoted the document almost verbatim. It used the phrase, liquidity event. It mentioned the specific, fictitious offshore accounts I had listed in his version of the file. It painted me as desperate, trying to bribe my way out of the scandal. "He took the bait," I said. "He did more than that," Marcus said, swiping the screen. "He sold it. Look at this." He pulled up a secure banking log. Redcliffe had been monitoring Lucas's known crypto wallets, the ones he thought were anonymous. 2 hours before the article went live, a transfer of $50,000 in Bitcoin hit his wallet. Marcus explained, "The source wallet is known to be associated with a broker who sells info to short sellers and tabloids. Lucas didn't just leak it to hurt you. He leaked it because he is broke and needed the cash." I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. It was not just betrayal. It was cheap betrayal. He had sold his sister for the price of a mid-range luxury car. "Get the board," I said. "Tell them the emergency meeting is on. And tell them to bring their lawyers." The boardroom was tense. The 12 directors were looking at me with a mixture of hostility and fear. The stock was wobbling. The press was camped outside the building. They thought I was the captain of a sinking ship. Mr. Henderson spoke first. "Ms. Austin, this is untenable," he said, slamming his hand on the table. "First the sell-off rumors, now this report about bribes. We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. If you are looting the company to pay off your family, we have no choice but to demand your resignation." I stood at the head of the table. I did not sit. I projected an image of absolute calm. I agree. Mr. Henderson, I said, if those reports were true, I should be fired. I pressed a button on the console. The projector screen descended. But they are not true, I said, and I am going to show you exactly why. I walked them through the trap. I showed them the 3 documents. I showed them the timestamps of when they were sent and when they were opened. I showed them the linguistic watermarks. I sent 3 different lies to 3 different people. I explained. My father got a merger. My mother got a tax scandal. Lucas got a dividend payout. I pointed to the article displayed on the screen. The press is reporting on the dividend, I said, which means the leak came from one person, Lucas Austin. The room was silent. Henderson's mouth was slightly open. But why? Asked a female board member named Mrs. Galloway. Why would he publish a lie that makes you look like you are bribing him? Because he didn't know it was a lie. I said, he thought it was real. He thought he was exposing my desperation. And more importantly, I clicked the remote. The screen changed to show the blockchain transaction. He was paid for it. I said, $50,000. That is the price of your confidential information. That is the price of the company's reputation. My brother sold a fabricated internal memo to a short seller broker to make a quick profit. I turned to Henderson. You asked me last week about family influence. I said, you were worried I was too close to them. I think this demonstrates clearly that my family is not my ally. They are corporate saboteurs. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. Lucas Austin is currently holding a short position on our stock. I lied, or rather, I extrapolated. Knowing it was likely true, he is betting against us. He is manipulating the market using insider access that he should not have. I looked at Henderson. I know you still take his calls. Bill, I said, I know he called you last night to confirm the dividend rumor. Henderson turned a sickly shade of gray. You confirmed a rumor you knew nothing about. I said, you validated a leak. That makes you complicit in insider trading. Henderson slumped in his chair. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. I am willing to overlook your indiscretion. Bill, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, provided that from this moment on, the door is shut. No more calls, no more lunches, no more back channels. If any member of this board communicates with Richard, Elena, or Lucas Austin regarding company business again, I will hand this evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I looked around the room. Do we have an understanding? The nods were vigorous this time. They were terrified. I had proven not only that I was innocent of the accusations, but that I was capable of a level of ruthlessness that Walter would have applauded. I had turned a PR crisis into a purge. I want a press release issued within the hour. I commanded. Deny the dividend. Deny the sell-off. State that the company is investigating criminal leaks and will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. Let the stock rebound. I walked out of the meeting, leaving them stunned. Back in my office, I called Marcus. Cut them off, I said. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I mean everything. I said, block their emails to the corporate server, blacklist their phone numbers on the executive exchange, revoke their security clearance for the building. I know my father still has a key card. Kill it all. I looked at the city below. And Marcus? Send a package to Lucas. What should be in it? A printout of the blockchain transfer, I said, and a single chess piece. Which one? The pawn, I said. I hung up. The media storm would break by evening. The narrative would shift from Austin Harris in chaos to Austin family under investigation for market manipulation. I had turned their own weapon against them. They had tried to use the press to destroy me, and I had used the press to expose them as frauds. I sat down in my chair, Walter's chair, and closed my eyes for a moment. It was quiet. The phone had stopped ringing. For the first time since the funeral, the silence wasn't waiting for a storm. The silence was the sound of victory. My family was on the outside, scratching at the glass, and I had just reinforced the windows. The victory with the board was satisfying, but it was merely a stabilization maneuver. I had stopped the bleeding, but I had not yet removed the infection. To do that, I needed to understand the pathology of the disease. I knew my family was greedy, but greed alone does not explain the sheer desperation I had witnessed. Greed makes you calculate. Panic makes you reckless. And my father, mother, and brother were acting with the recklessness of people who were being chased. I found the answer on a rainy Tuesday night, 3 weeks after I took the CEO chair. Marcus walked into my office. He was not alone. Beside him stood a man I hadn't seen in 15 years. It was Mr. Abernathy. He was a small, nervous man who used to be the junior accountant for the family estate before my father had him fired for insubordination. He looked older now, his suit a little frayed, clutching a briefcase like a life preserver. "Ms. Austin," Marcus said. Mr. Abernathy reached out to Redcliffe. "He has something you need to see." I stood up and offered him a seat. He sat on the edge of the leather chair, refusing to make eye contact. "I heard you are in charge now." "Nina," he said quietly. His hands were shaking. "I heard you are actually looking at the books." "I am," I said. "Then you are going to need the real books," he said. "Not the ones they show the IRS. Not the ones they showed Walter." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a hard drive. It was old, a brick of a thing from a decade ago, but he treated it like a holy relic. "I kept a mirror copy," he whispered, "before your father kicked me out. I knew this day would come. I knew the math would eventually catch up with the lies." We plugged the drive into the secure server. What appeared on the screen was not just accounting. It was an autopsy of a financial crime that had been running for 20 years. We started with my father. I always assumed Richard Austin lived off the generous allowance Walter gave him. I was wrong. The data showed a man who had been hemorrhaging money for decades. Bad real estate deals in Florida, a failed casino venture in Macau, a chain of restaurants that never opened. But the true horror was in the liabilities column. "Marcus, look at this," I said, pointing to a series of entries dated 3 years ago. It was a loan structure, a massive one. My father had borrowed $150 million from a private equity consortium known for its predatory lending practices. The interest rate was 18%. It was loan sharking wrapped in a corporate suit. "But how did he get approved for that?" Marcus asked. "He didn't have the assets." I scrolled to the collateral section. My heart stopped. "He didn't use his assets," I said, my voice cold. "He used Walter's." There, in black and white, was the smoking gun. My father had forged documents claiming he had anticipated power of attorney over the Austin estate. He had essentially sold the inheritance before Walter was even dead. He had promised the lenders that the moment the will was read, they would be paid back in full, with a $20 million patience bonus. He was betting on the death of his own father. I said, he was counting down the days. It explained everything. It explained the desperation in the lawyer's office. It explained the panic when the no puppeteers clause was read. He wasn't just disappointed he didn't get the money. He was terrified. Without that inheritance, he had no way to pay back the $150 million. He was defaulting on a debt to dangerous people. We moved on to my mother. Elena Austin's file was less aggressive but equally rotten. Her Elena Austin Foundation for the Arts was a fixture in the city. She threw galas to raise money for underprivileged sculptors and avant-garde theater. The ledger told a different story. "Look at the outflow," Mr. Abernathy said, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. I looked. For every dollar raised, only 10 cents actually went to any artist. The other 90 cents went to administrative consulting, event coordination, and travel expenses. I clicked on the vendor list. The consultants were all shell companies. I recognized the addresses. One was a condo in Paris that my mother used for sabbaticals. Another was a jewelry designer in Milan. She wasn't running a charity, I said. She was running a tax-free shopping spree. She was laundering her lifestyle through the guise of philanthropy. "This is embezzlement," Marcus noted. "If the IRS sees this, she goes to federal prison." Then we got to Lucas. Lucas's file was the most volatile. We already knew about his debts, but the hard drive revealed the source of his cash flow problems. It wasn't just failed startups. He is part of a syndicate, Mr. Abernathy explained. It is called the Alpha Group. They run pump and dump schemes on penny stocks and unregulated crypto tokens. I watched the transaction logs. Lucas was the face. The syndicate used his last name, Austin, to give credibility to worthless investments. They would hype a stock, claim the Austin family was buying in, drive the price up, and then sell before the crash. But here was the twist. Lucas was bad at it. He was the mark. The syndicate was using him to lure in investors, but they were cutting him out of the profits and leaving him with the liability. He owed them money. Serious money. He is swimming with sharks, and he is bleeding, I said. I sat back in my chair. The picture was complete. My family wasn't just dysfunctional. They were a criminal enterprise operating under the umbrella of my grandfather's good name. They had hollowed out their own integrity and were now trying to hollow out mine to fill the void. I looked at Mr. Abernathy. "Why didn't you tell Walter?" I asked. "I tried," he said, looking down. "But your father. He intercepted the report. He told me if I ever spoke to Walter again, he would ensure I never worked in this state. I have a family. Nina, I was scared." I nodded. I understood fear. I had lived with it for years. "You did the right thing coming here," I said. "Marcus, set Mr. Abernathy up with a retainer. He is now a consultant for Redcliffe. And get him security." After Abernathy left, I looked at the data. It was enough to bury them. It was enough to send them all to jail for 20 years. I need an independent investigator. I told Marcus, not Redcliffe. I need someone official. Someone with a badge. Marcus looked concerned. "Once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. If you bring in the authorities, your father goes to prison. Your mother goes to prison. The Austin name gets dragged through the mud." "The Austin name is already in the mud," I said. "I am just the one holding the hose to wash it off." I was about to pick up the phone when my private line rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it on speaker. "Hello?" "Nina." It was my father. His voice was different. It wasn't the booming voice of the patriarch, nor the desperate voice of the failed heir. It was low, menacing, and stripped of all pretense. "We need to talk," he said. "I am listening, Richard." "I know you are looking at the old ledgers," he said. "Abernathy was seen entering your building. You think you are clever. You think you have found the smoking gun." "I have found a lot of guns, Dad," I said, "and they are all pointed at you." "Listen to me carefully," he hissed. "You are playing a game you do not understand. The people I owe money to, they are not bankers. They do not send letters. They send breakers. If I go down, if I default, they don't just come for me. They come for the estate. They come for the source." "Are you threatening me with your loan sharks?" I asked, incredulous. "I am telling you the reality," he shouted, losing his cool. "You need to release the funds. You need to sign the guarantee. If you don't, I will go to the press tomorrow, not with leaks, with stories about Walter." I paused. "Stories about Walter?" "You think the old man was a saint?" My father sneered. "I know where the bodies are buried. Nina, I know about the labor strikes in the 80s. I know about the environmental shortcuts. If you don't bail me out, I will destroy his legacy. I will make sure the name Walter Austin is synonymous with corruption. I will burn his memory to the ground to save myself." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. He was willing to destroy the only man who had ever actually built anything. The man whose coattails he had ridden for 60 years, just to cover his own incompetence. He was bluffing. Walter had told me about the strikes. He had told me about the mistakes. He had owned them. My father had nothing but smoke. "Is that it?" I asked. "Don't test me. Nina, release $50 million by noon tomorrow, or I start talking." I didn't scream. I didn't argue. "Goodbye, Richard," I said. I hung up the phone. Marcus was watching me. "He is going to scorch the earth," Marcus said. "No," I said, standing up. He is trying to light a match in a hurricane. I looked at the hard drive. Prepare the package, I said. Full disclosure. The fraud. The embezzlement. The market manipulation. Who do we send it to? Marcus asked. Everyone, I said. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the District Attorney, the IRS, and the FBI. But Nina, Marcus hesitated. This is your family. I looked at him, and I felt the weight of the last 12 years lift off my shoulders. I realized that biology was an accident, but family was a choice, and these people had made their choice a long time ago. They are not my family, I said. They are defendants. I authorized the data transfer. As the progress bar scrolled across the screen, moving the evidence from my private server to the federal authorities, I knew there was no going back. I wasn't just protecting the money anymore. I was performing an amputation. It was going to be bloody, and it was going to hurt, but it was the only way to survive. The phone rang again, then my cell phone, then the office line. They were calling. They knew the walls were closing in. I walked over to the wall and unplugged the landline. I turned my cell phone off and dropped it in the drawer. Let it ring, I said to the empty room. I walked to the window and watched the rain falling on the city. Somewhere out there, 3 people were realizing that the ATM was not just broken, it was reporting them to the police. The financial truth wasn't just a ledger, it was a judgment, and the gavel was about to come down harder than they could ever imagine. The end did not come with a scream or an explosion. It came with the quiet scratch of a pen on paper. It was Wednesday morning, less than 12 hours after I had sent the evidence of my family's crimes to the federal authorities. I sat in Mr. Thorne's office, the same room where the war had begun. The city view was the same, indifferent and gray, but the atmosphere inside the room had shifted entirely. Thorne was no longer looking at me with grandfatherly concern. He was looking at me with the deference one accords to a fellow strategist. "We are ready to execute Clause 9, Thorne said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. Clause 9, the forfeiture clause, the dead man's switch. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I did not feel a flicker of hesitation. I thought about the 18-year-old girl shivering in a motel room. I thought about the years of silence. I thought about Lucas selling my reputation for $50,000. By signing this, Thorne reminded me, his voice professional and dry, "You are formally certifying that Richard, Elena, and Lucas Austin have violated the non-interference terms of the will through active litigation, cyber espionage, and attempted extortion." "I know what it means," I said. "Upon your signature," Thorne continued, "the family maintenance fund is dissolved. The $50 million principal is transferred immediately to the Feline Rescue Foundation. The monthly stipends cease. The trust accounts covering their mortgages, their insurance, and their legal fees are frozen. They will be destitute within the hour." I looked at the document. It was not just a legal form. It was an eviction notice from a lifestyle they had done nothing to earn. "Do it," I said. I signed my name, Nina Austin. Thorne took the paper. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Process the transfer," he said to his assistant, "and release the audit findings to the press." It was done. I did not need to fire them. I did not need to evict them personally. The machinery Walter had built, the machinery I now controlled, did the work for me. I was merely the operator pressing the start button. By noon, the world had turned upside down. I watched it unfold from the safety of my office, surrounded by screens. It was like watching a controlled demolition. The first pillar to fall was Lucas. The audit report detailing his involvement with the pump and dump syndicate hit the financial news wires at 10:30. By 11, the Alpha group he had been trying to impress realized he was radioactive. They didn't just drop him, they threw him to the wolves to save themselves. Marcus walked in, reading from a tablet. Lucas's creditors just called in his personal loans. Marcus said, "Since the trust fund is gone, he has no collateral. His condo is being seized. His car has been repossessed from the street. And the SEC just announced a formal inquiry into his trading activities." I nodded. He wanted to be a player. I said, Now he knows the price of the game. The second pillar was my mother. The release of the internal ledgers from her charity was devastating because it was so petty. The public might forgive high-stakes corporate raiding, but they do not forgive stealing from artists to buy handbags. The social media backlash was instantaneous. The board of directors for the City Museum asked for her resignation. The country club where she held court revoked her membership, citing a morals clause in the bylaws. She didn't just lose her money, Marcus observed. She lost her audience. For her, that is a fate worse than death. And then, there was my father. Richard Austin had bet everything on the idea that he could bully me into a settlement. He had promised his loan sharks that the money was coming. When the news broke that the family maintenance fund was dissolved, that the $50 million was gone forever, his leverage evaporated. At 2 o'clock, I received a notification from the front desk security. "Your father is here," the guard said. "He is demanding to see you. He says it is a matter of life and death." I looked at the camera feed. My father was in the lobby. He looked manic. His tie was crooked, his hair disheveled. He was shouting at the receptionist, slamming his hand on the marble counter. He looked like a man who could hear the footsteps of the people he owed money to coming up the sidewalk behind him. I pressed the intercom. "Don't let him up," I said. "He is causing a scene. Ms. Austin," the guard said. "He is yelling that you are killing him." I watched the screen. I saw the desperation in his eyes. It was the same look he had given me when he cut me off years ago. Only now, the power dynamic was reversed. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a bailout. He wanted me to fix the mess he had created. "Tell him to leave," I said, "or call the police." I watched as 2 security guards escorted him out. He looked back at the camera, screaming my name, but the soundproof glass reduced his rage to a silent pantomime. He was a ghost, fading into the noise of the city he once thought he owned. The final collapse happened that evening. My phone, which had been silent for hours, rang once. It was a text message from a blocked number. It was a group chat initiated by my mother, including Lucas and my father. "Please," the message read, "we have nothing. They are taking the house. We have nowhere to go. We are family. You can't do this. Just give us enough to leave the country. We will disappear. Please, Nina." I stared at the screen. I felt a phantom ache in my chest. The old instinct to please. The old desire to be accepted. It would be so easy to write a check. $1 million. $2 million. It was nothing to me now. It was pocket change. But then I remembered the chess games. I remembered Walter's voice. Control disguised as care is the hardest chain to break. If I saved them now, I wouldn't be helping them. I would be enabling them. I would be restarting the cycle of dysfunction that Walter had tried so hard to end. They had to learn the lesson I learned at 18. They had to learn how to survive on their own. I typed a single response. "You have your health. You have your education. You have the freedom to work. That is more than most people get. Good luck." I hit send. Then I blocked the number permanently. I left the office. I didn't go home to my condo. I told Elias to drive north. We drove for 2 hours, leaving the city lights behind, until we reached the iron gates of the lake house. The estate was dark, silent, and imposing against the night sky. It was technically mine now, along with everything else. I walked into the solarium. The air smelled of dust and old tobacco. The chessboard was still sitting on the table by the window, exactly where we had left it after our last game. The pieces were set in the middle of a match. Walter had been playing white. I was playing black. I sat down in my chair. I looked at the board. The game had been unfinished. He had cornered my king, but I had a counter move I hadn't played yet. I reached out and picked up the black knight. I moved it 2 squares up and 1 square over. "Checkmate," I whispered into the silence. I sat there for a long time, watching the moonlight reflect off the lake. I thought about the money, $3.8 billion. It was a staggering amount, a number that could buy nations. But as I sat there, I realized that the money wasn't the inheritance. The money was just the tool. The real inheritance was the ability to sit in this chair in this house, and feel absolutely safe. The real inheritance was the knowledge that I would never again be at the mercy of people who did not love me. Walter hadn't just left me a fortune, he had left me the power to walk away. I was the unplanned child, the disappointment, the one not worth investing in, and now I was the only one left standing. I stood up, I walked to the window and looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't see a victim anymore. I didn't see a vengeful granddaughter. I saw Nina Austin. I turned off the light. I walked out of the room, closing the door on the past. The game was over. The board was cleared. And for the first time in my life, the next move was entirely mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and the ultimate comeback. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening while driving, working, or relaxing at home? Please drop a comment below to share your location and your thoughts on Nina's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help us share these powerful stories with more people.